Hello and welcome to this video. We will discuss about the first chapter of your history, that is French Revolution. In this video, we will discuss about the financial condition and the basic structure of French society during 18th century. In 1774, Louis XVI, a 20-year young from the Bourbon dynasty, ascended the throne of France. In 1774, Louis XVI became the king of France who belonged to Bourbon dynasty, and during the acquisition of throne he was just 20 years old. He was welcomed by empty treasure. When he became the king, the treasure house of France was empty because of various reasons, like first, long years of war had drained the financial resources of France. As we all know that France was involved in World War One. Because of its long involvement in war, it was already facing financial crisis because war drained out all the financial resources. We have to divert our finance towards the war. Second, the cost of maintaining an extravagant court at the immense palace of Versailles. Not only Louis XVI but his ancestors were also very fond of extravagant court, means very luxurious and grand court, and maintaining that financially grand court also contributed to the empty treasure. Then third, under Louis XVI, France helped the 13 American colonies to gain their independence from the Britain. At that time, American colonies were struggling to acquire independence from the British colony. The British people colonized over different places of America, and at that time 13 different colonies united together to get independence from Britain, and in that independence struggle France came forward to help America. So it was already facing financial burden. When again it involved in a independence struggle, it again get burdenized by more billion livres, which added to the existing 2 billion livre. Livre is a measuring unit. Lenders began to charge 10% interest on loans. So, the France government spent more percentage of its budget on interest payment alone. The other countries who helped France in order to lend money to France to maintain its financial matters, they now began to charge 10% interest on the loan amount. So, in that situation, France now have to divert more of its budget to repay the loan rather than maintaining other affairs. In that situation, the government thought to increase the tax, which was very inevitable, because we all know that whether it's monarchical form of government or autocratical form of government, any form of government fulfill its budget requirement from the taxes of people, whether they are king or elected form of government. Every form of government require tax to manage its financial affairs. And in France, particularly at that time, there was so shortage of financial resources that in such situation, the government, the monarchical government, decided to increase the tax. Before we will discuss in detail about the tax, let us try to understand the basic structure of French society. The French society was divided into three states. In 18th century or during 18th century, the French society was sharply divided as first state, second state and third state. The first state includes clergy. Clergy means those group of people who were associated with church. The second estate, it includes nobility, means the king and his relatives. And the third estate. The third estate include all the rest people except clergy and nobility, which includes big businessmen, merchants, court officials, peasants, artisans, landless laborers, servant, etc. All the rest people except clergy and nobility group. The peasants made up about 90% of the population. The peasant group alone made 90% of the total population of France, means only 10% people were clergy, nobility, businessmen, servant and court officials, any other profession people constitute only 10% of total population of France, whereas the peasant group alone constitute 90% of the total population of the France. About 60% of the land was owned by nobles, the church, and other richer members of third estate. Whereas these group, the nobles, the church people, and other rich people of third estate, they constitute only 10% of total population of France. They owned 60% land of France, whereas the peasants constitute 90% of total population of France, but they have access to only 40% of land of France. The peasants were obliged to render service to the Lord, to work in his house and fields, to serve in the army, or to participate in building roads. The peasants, because of their lack of access to land resource, they have to look for other services too in order to maintain their livelihood. So peasants were doing peasantry, and at the same time they also sometimes served to the nobility and the church people, worked for their own house and also practicing peasantry. They also served to the army whenever their nation indulged in any war, and also contribute to labor when there is construction works. Now let us discuss about the taxation. From the junior classes, we are discussing repeatedly that division is not a problem. It existed in any society. But the problem arises when there is discrimination on the basis of division, or when there is unequal treatment on the basis of division. Now let us discuss that how the division of French society into first state, second state and third state create problem. Because of the financial burden and financial crisis that was faced by France, the government decided to increase the tax. Now the problem is the members of the first two estates, that is the clergy and nobility, enjoyed certain privilege by birth. The nobility and the clergy people were privileged. They enjoyed certain facility by birth because of their belongingness to the first or the second estate. What are those privileges? First, they were exempted from paying taxes to the state. They did not have to pay any tax. Second, the nobles enjoyed feudal privilege. That means they were not paying the tax, rather, they were getting taxes from the peasants, which was called tille. Whereas the church also extracted tax from the peasants, which was called tithe. Now look at the division and the discrimination. There were three states. first state, second state and third state. First and second state people did not have to pay any tax. That means the taxes were borne by the third state people. Again, in the third state group, there were rich people and poor people. Among them, there were peasants who constitute the 90% population of France but have access to only 40% land. And they also have to pay other taxes which were common for all third state people, and except that they also have to pay two different taxes to nobles and to church. The tax that was paid to nobles by the peasant was known as style, and the tax that was paid to church by the peasants was known as tithe. That means that all the members of the third state had to pay taxes to the state. A number of indirect taxes on articles like everyday consumption like salt or tobacco, etc. The third state people had to pay tax on their daily essentials also, whereas the first and second state people were exempted from all the forms of taxes. So, the burden of financing activities of the state through taxes was borne by the third state alone. And we already discussed that any type of government need tax to run his country or to run his nation or to meet his financial requirement. So tax is very essential to run government, whether it's elected form or monarchical form or any other form. And it was same for France. France also required tax to meet his financial needs. And because first and second state people were exempted from all the form of taxes, the whole burden of tax was on third state people alone, and that is the problem. Some within the third state were rich and some were poor. So to some extent, I'm not saying that they were enjoying, but to some extent paying tax was a bit easier for the rich section of third state people, but it was complete burden for the poor section of third state people. That's all about this video. Thank you.